Hey, I've got super cool news. We are ready to move into stage 4 in our stepping stone plan of making our way back to in-person gatherings. And step 4 is we gather together in family units here to worship together in person in the gym. And we're going to have enough room for everyone to be seated in family units at our standard service times of 9:30 and 11, even if we have a 100% return to our pre-quarantine average attendance. Now, I know that we most likely won't have a 100% return because not all of you are as comfortable with gathering together in person, and that's totally fine. We will continue to offer online worship experiences for those who feel like they need to remain at home in this season. We totally understand, and we're glad for you to continue worshiping with us from your home online. For those of you who are comfortable to come and gather with us here in person, know that not everybody's at the same comfort level as you are. So let's show grace and patience with one another. I know that some of you are going to be ready to give everyone a hug, but not everyone's going to be ready to receive a hug. So just be cautious on how we welcome one another in this in-person gathering. Now, because we'll be worshiping with our children, there'll be no kids worship or nursery offered during this time. I just want to give a special word of encouragement to our families with small children. No, first of all, we're just going to be glad that you are here. And it's going to be an adjustment to have your small children worshiping with you, but know that we're glad that they're here, and we will love hearing their voices, hearing their cries, because this building has stayed too silent too long, and so we'll be glad for them to be here. Second, I hope that we'll embrace this as an opportunity to train our children to worship the Lord, to watch us worship. It'll be an opportunity for them to think about this season that we're going through and how worship remained a priority for us. And so just as hopefully your children have seen you making worship a priority at home, we'll be able to show them that priority here as we gather in person. And it'll be an opportunity to show our children how we sit and listen to God's word be preached. And third, I just want to say that if at any point during the service you need to step out because your child just isn't able to hang with Pastor Daniel's message, know that there's no judgment, and we'll be glad for you to attend as much as possible. And so if you need to slip out after music before the sermon starts or after the sermon started, there'll be no judgment. We'll just be glad that you joined us. Now, as we make our way back into in-person gatherings, it's going to be awkward because the layout of our gathering is going to be different. It'll be just a completely different scenario, and so it'll be strange for all of us. And there are going to be some bumps in the road, no doubt. It's also going to be strange because we have been in quarantine for 3 months, and we've been antisocial for the last several months. And then when we do have the opportunity to come back together, it's going to be in a completely strange and different way. And so 2 things on that. One, let's use this as an opportunity to see what it probably feels like for a visitor to walk in the doors of our church for the first time. Would be a completely foreign experience to us, just like it is for them when they walk in for the first time. And so it'll help us think in their mindset. It'll help us see through their eyes of what it's like to come and be a part of our gatherings. And then second, let's just lean into the awkwardness, because that's what the gospel is all about. It's about coming in with not everything figured out. There's still brokenness in us. And so we're just going to embrace that awkward, embrace the mess of it, gather together and worship King Jesus. Now, there are a few ways that I would encourage you not to return. And our friends at Rejoice Church, at Free Will Baptist Church in Owasso, Oklahoma, put together a great video about 16 ways that you should not return to church. So I hope that you'll check that out and enjoy it right now.
Not up to code. Definitely against the regulations. Sir, that's against the rules. That's against the regulations. I'm going to need you to CDC yourself out of here.
Hey, how are you?
Shoot, Corona!
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens.
Hey, 6 feet, sir. 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. I said 6 feet. 6 feet. 6 feet, people. All right, guys. Hey, appreciate the meeting. It's been real good. I'm sorry, what? You're muted. We can't hear you. You're muted. Yeah, we need to finish this later. Hey, love you guys. See ya. All right. Hey!
Excuse me. I'm essential.
Amen. Whoa, girl. Sorry. No donuts. New normal. No bulletin. New normal. Oop, no handshaking. New normal. No passing the offering plate. New normal. Hey, you need some Clorox wipes? No Kleenex? I got hand sanitizer. How about some toilet paper? Do not lick that doorknob. Do not lick that doorknob. Well, y'all know it's a conspiracy, right? Area 51 is where it came from. China. 99.2% recovery rate, 98.6% recovery rate, 97% death rate, 98.247% recovery rate. You wanna know how I build up my immunity? Bare feet. Comes right up through the bottom, them germs. Make you strong as an ox. Yeah. Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
Hey, we ain't even sick.
Ah, but you will be soon! Kids, hurry up! We gotta save our seats! Let's go! Come on, kids, I got your blankets. Front row seats! They'll never take our freedom!
So on top of the craziness of quarantine, our nation right now is facing an incredible amount of unrest, protests, and even riots in the wake of the death of George Floyd. And that has even touched the family of one of our congregants, Candace Summer. Her family has run the Plano Vision Center for many years, and they actually experienced an incredible amount of damage as a result of rioting and looting. And so Pastor Eric was able to sit down and chat with her over Zoom about what that's like and how we can be generous and help out the Plano Vision Center during this time.
So I'm Candace Summers. I'm a captain in the Army. Been stationed here in Evansville for about 2 years now, but I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised there until I was about 18 and then went to school. I'm the mother of 2 kids. I have Corbin and Carter, and then I'm married to Mike, who's also in the Army, and he also serves as a government employee for the Army Reserves. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is something that happened to my family on the 31st of May. What is it called? Sorry, optometry clinic was destroyed. Well, not completely destroyed. It was damaged after the protest from the George Floyd protest in Chicago. The building had all of the windows in the front of it completely shattered. The carpets were burned. You could see where people were trying to light the building on fire. And the clinic has been a staple in the south side of Chicago since 1959 when it was founded by my grandfather and his colleague. They created the clinic as a way to provide vision services and exams and therapy to an underserved population and a low-income population. So it's a non-for-profit organization that continues to provide essential services to all sorts of people. I know I myself used the vision therapy as a kid. I was a crazy little kid up until 2. And it's really funny to hear the stories my family will put out about what happened the first time I put on glasses and what that does for someone, because our sight is what we see, but our vision is how we see. It's how we understand the world. And that difference is so important. So without vision, we don't have any control. We don't know how to interpret our world around us. So like from 2 on, I've been wearing my glasses, and I mean the difference that therapy has had for even Carter. So he's using it now too, and just the growth and development and his improvements for the past year have been instrumental to how he's doing in school. So it's a great little place that supports any and everyone with whatever resources that person can provide.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And it's definitely devastating to hear that a lot of these businesses, and this is a not-for-profit, um, have been affected adversely, I mean, by coronavirus already, and then to come back and to be hit with this. So what is your family doing to try and bounce back from this?
Yeah, so my aunt is currently the director of the clinic, and it's really awesome. I have a really strong family that's really strong in faith, and their goal is to raise $100,000 to help rebuild the clinic from the damage it did sustain. So one of my cousins actually had the idea of just creating a GoFundMe and seeing if really the world would come to their aid and just help to support their mission and their vision and their work that they do for the community on the south side of Chicago. Still, we understand why the damage happened, and we don't want to take away from that either, because we understand that, yeah, there is probably a need for legit reform, but still with the concerns and the damage that was sustained, Plano acts as a building block for the community. It's a place where young children will get much needed resources that will help them throughout their lives and their livelihood once they understand how to really process information and how to understand the stimulus that's really coming into their brain through their eyes. It's really awesome to see what the world will do, and that's really just by asking a question. I know I'm overall a really, really private person. I don't post almost anything on social media ever, uh, but this is something I truly believe in. It's something that I've personally seen the benefit of, and it's an organization that is so needed in an underrepresented population.
You said that this is an essential service. It's a gospel service. This is sometimes we think of things in terms of the gospel being like this message that we tell people, and the gospel kind of ends where the prayer ends and people know Jesus. But the gospel is much more than that. It's the proclaiming of God's kingdom here on earth, that there is an entirely different way of life that doesn't necessarily accord with the way that society is or the power structures that currently are. And whenever you provide services like this for underrepresented people groups, and are able to affect change for entire groups of people, that is definitely gospel work. Um, so it's really, really cool, and we have the opportunity to be able to help you guys be able to rebuild, and continue to provide these services. So it's pretty awesome. What do you think that people who maybe um, don't understand the situation, maybe don't understand the plight of African Americans right now, maybe because they're so socially distant? What do you think that they, these people like me, who have not been in these types of circles, can do to be able to better understand and pray for our African American brothers and sisters?
I I think, yeah, I think it really starts with prayer. But I would say that it really does start with being willing to speak up for someone else. And when you realize something is wrong, not letting it go by. I think that's part of it. Um, and, supporting Black and minority businesses too. I think that's another part of it. It's like controlling where we spend our money is a huge piece of it when we want to talk about giving someone in a community an actual chance to thrive. I think a lot of it starts um, there. And I think it's even asking ourselves, our own questions and realizing we have our own internal bias, but not letting our own biases stop us from, one, being willing to offer help and support to someone else. But overall, it's just being willing to educate yourself on someone that's different than you, and learning more history than necessarily the history we're taught in school. That's still history is still written by one or two people from one or two perspectives. um, and I think that that's a part of it too. But overall, yeah, I would say being willing to learn, being willing to listen, and then being willing to support those communities when they need you the most. And that can be still through giving to Black-owned businesses, and also giving of time. And that's, if you were to support one of the protests, or even just being willing to send a note or a message on social media or email, just to show that you're there for the communities.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful. I hadn't even thought of the supporting businesses. Well, that's really good.
Yeah, I don't know how many are really in Evansville.
Right.
Because I was thinking about this, like, well, how many are there? Because it's like, I have for the Army, they give us a system that kind of shows who's where. I think Evansville, for one of my stations, from like 17 to 24-year-olds, it's about 95% white. So it's like 5% is everybody else. It's like, well, how can I help that other 5% be represented? Because I mean, you'll see like small forms of biases all around you, really, when you look. And of course, like when you're in a predominant area, yeah, things are going to cater to the standard and to the norm. But it's like, well, what is it like when you're the only one in an area and the roles are reversed? It's like, how often have you been to a place where you're the 5% versus everyone else? It's definitely a mind shift.
You have been so generous through this season. I am just blown away at how faithful you have been to give. And I thought that we would want to be generous to the Plano Vision Center in this time of need. And at the time of our recording, they had already raised just over half of the funds needed to make the necessary repairs. And I'd love for us to be a part of bringing them back to where they need to be to continue to do the work that they've been doing these many years. And so we've included a link in the description of this video on how you can make a contribution to this cause. And I'm so thankful that so many of you have been generous through these past 3 months by giving online at faithinchandler.com/give, giving via the Venmo app to @faithfwbchurch, texting give in, or even mailing in your offerings and tithes. And if you'd like to make a gift to the Plano Vision Center by designating it on your gift that you give this week at the church, please feel free, and we'll be happy to pass that along to that cause. Thank you so much for your generosity.
Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Who am I that the bright and morning star would choose to light the way for my ever-wandering heart? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling, Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you told me who I am. I am yours. Who am I that the eyes that see my sin would look on me with love and watch me rise again? Who am I that the voice that calmed the sea would call out through the rain not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you told me who I am. Because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you told me who I am. I am yours. I am yours. I am yours. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? 'Cause I am yours. I am yours. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? 'Cause I am yours. I am yours.
You know, at the beginning of this quarantine, I was really struggling with trying to figure out how long can our church go without having an in-person gathering. And we even looked as a board at how many weeks can we go without receiving an offering? How long can we last on our rainy day fund? And looking back at that now, I see I should have recognized that whenever the church faces a dark hour, it often ends up being one of its finest hours. I think about here locally in Evansville, World War II, there was some major challenges. Evansville had experienced the Great Depression like the rest of the country. It was a place where there was very little work to be found. But when World War II began and America got into World War II, there was not only the shipyard down at the river, which employed 19,000 people, but then Republic Aviation purchased the land, which is now the Whirlpool, or what was the Whirlpool plant. Most people think of still today as the Whirlpool plant, even though they're no longer there. They purchased that ground and started building that building, and they were going to employ 6,000 people. And a lot of people actually thought there's no way that Evansville can supply both the shipyard and Republic Aviation with the workers that it needs to produce these troop carriers and also to produce these P-47 Thunderbolts. But that time period of World War II was one of Evansville's finest hours. And Evansville was a major contributor to the war effort. And Evansville actually grew by 25,000. Vanderbilt County grew by 25,000 residents during that time. And the same is true for the church. Whenever there is a dark season, whenever there is a time of great persecution, whenever there's a time of great difficulty, it ends up being one of the finest hours. And I should have recognized this because that's what has played out in history time and time again, even from the very beginning. That's what we see happening in Acts chapter 8. And this next section, the second section of the book of Acts, we see that this time of persecution, this time of the people being scattered, that it was a time when the church moved forward. Let me read you some verses from Acts chapter 8. This is right after Stephen, the deacon, has been murdered. He's been killed. Saul, who was there, was supportive of his stoning. Verse 1 of chapter 8 says, "Now Saul was consenting to his death. At that time, a great persecution arose against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." So this great persecution arises, and everyone is scattered except for the apostles. And Saul is going from place to place making havoc. Verse 3 says, "As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere, preaching the word." And what we see happen here is when Saul is persecuting the church and the people are being dragged off to prison and the people have been scattered, what we see happen is the church actually grows in this season because of what verse 4 says. Those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. And there are 3 really beautiful opportunities I want to point out about a scattering time. And the first one is seen here in verse number 4. "Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word." What happened in this scattering time is that all of these people who had been listening to the apostles, the disciples, preach the word in Jerusalem, they went everywhere preaching the word. Now, the word here for preach, it doesn't mean that they stood up in front of a large gathering of people like I would do on a Sunday morning at church. But rather it means evangelize. In other words, they weren't just preaching it to large gatherings of people in a church service or something along those lines. They were preaching it everywhere they went. They were speaking of it everywhere they went. And so the preaching of the gospel was not just something that was happening by a few in large settings occasionally. It was something that was happening. Everyone was doing these things. Everyone was a part of this everywhere that they went. And so those who were scattered were preaching the gospel everywhere they went. One of the beautiful things that happens in a scattering time is that those who perhaps had been kind of on the sidelines have an opportunity to jump in and be a part of what God is doing. One of the first things that we did in this quarantine time is we established a whole new set of discipleship groups, and we saw more discipleship groups form than we'd ever had before. And many of you jumped in to be a part of discipleship, or you jumped in to lead discipleship groups for the very first time. And God gave opportunity for more people to be involved in the work of the ministry. Just before the quarantine, Pastor Eric and I went to a conference, and God really laid it on my heart during that time that we needed a greater plurality of leadership in our church. In other words, we needed more people leading the way in gospel transformation, gospel proclamation. We need more people leading the way. And God has used this quarantine to do exactly that in our church. Verse 4 tells us that everyone who was scattered, everywhere they went, they were preaching the gospel. And then verse 5 tells us that Philip goes to Samaria and preaches Christ to them. Now, Philip was part of Jesus's group of disciples, and so he was a part of the group that was preaching the gospel there from the very beginning. But we haven't seen a whole lot of Philip in the forefront. We've mainly been seeing Peter as the main leader, and Peter would show up later in this chapter. But Philip here goes to Samaria, and he has the opportunity to preach the gospel in this moment. And so someone who's in leadership but also a little bit in the background steps forward into the forefront and has a major opportunity to share the gospel and to preach the gospel in the city of Samaria. What scattering times do is they show us that God's called all of us to be proclaiming the gospel. And maybe that doesn't look like preaching the gospel like Peter or Philip, or like leading the church in a way that perhaps I do, but God's called all of us to be proclaiming the gospel. God's called all of us to be a part of gospel transformation. It's something that every one of us is to be about. And I hope that through this quarantine time, I hope that during this season where we haven't been able to gather together, when we have been scattered, I hope that this scattering time has brought it to your heart to answer the call where God is calling you to be that one who preaches the gospel or evangelizes or shares the good news with others. And perhaps God's calling you to step forward in service and leadership at our church or in being a part of a discipleship group. God's used this time to reveal to you something that needs to happen next, the next step for you. One of the beautiful opportunities of a scattering time is that it gives more people the opportunity, gives more people the call, it gives more people the place to serve and to share the gospel. What happened in this moment is the church, when it scattered, it required more people to lead in all of these different places. Because when everyone was in Jerusalem, the disciples, the apostles, they were able to lead. But with everyone being scattered out everywhere, it required more leadership. And for us to answer the call that God's placed upon our church, for us to answer the call that God's placed upon our lives, we require more leaders. We need more leaders. We need you to step up and lead. And that's what happens here in Acts chapter 8. And so we see that in Acts chapter 8, there's this opportunity for more people to lead and to share. And we also see that there's this opportunity to reach people that wouldn't have been reached otherwise. You see, this passage tells us that they go everywhere preaching the gospel, and so they're sharing the gospel in places other than Jerusalem. And verse 5 says, Then Philip went down to the city of Samaria and preached Christ to them. And so not only is it going to places that it hadn't been going before, but it's going to people that before now hadn't really been considered friends. If you attended Sunday school or vacation Bible school when you were a kid, or you're just kind of familiar with some Bible stories, you're probably familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. The story of the Good Samaritan is when Jesus tells about a Jewish man who falls among thieves on a road, and people walk by and nobody cares for him, but a Samaritan happens by and the Samaritan cares for him, and that was a big deal. That was surprising because Samaritans and Jews didn't get along. And Jesus framed the story that way to point out that this Samaritan helps out a Jew. That was unexpected. Jews and Samaritans did not get along. Right now in our country, we have this major division. Right now in our country, we have this major polarization. And there's polarization and division along racial lines. There's polarization and division along political lines. There's polarization along socioeconomic lines. But the gospel transcends all of that. And so when Philip goes and preaches the gospel in Samaria, he is sharing the gospel with people who the Jews have not gotten along with. The Jews had all of these stipulations and rules about being around Gentiles, but the rules that they had about Samaritans, those were the most strenuous. Jews were taught not to fraternize with Gentiles, but especially not with Samaritans. And so for Philip to go and preach the gospel to these Samaritans, it was a big deal. And one of the things that we see happen in revival is revival always takes place when God's people pray, but also revival takes place when God's people get a hold of the fact that we don't earn our standing with God. And when we recognize the fact that we don't earn our standing with God, we recognize the fact that our standing with God is not anything that we have because we are so good or we are so noble. We don't think of ourselves as better than others because we aren't better than anyone. What we have was given to us. It wasn't achieved. We received it. We did not achieve it. It was a gift that was given to us. We did not earn that. And actually what we see happen later in Acts chapter 8, if you read later on in this story, we see that one of the men in Samaria who comes to the gospel, he has to be taught. He has to recognize the fact that it can't be bought, that it is a gift. It's the grace of God that's given to him. And what happens whenever there's revival, God's people recognize that what has been given to us is a gift. I'm not better than anyone. I'm not better than anyone of a different race, of a different political party. I'm not better than anyone of a different background. I'm not better than anyone because all that I am, all that is good in me is God in me. It's what God has given to me. And so Philip goes and he preaches the gospel to the Samaritans because Philip's not better than the Samaritans. All the good in Philip is what Jesus has done in Philip. And so a scattering time gives us opportunity to share the gospel with people we wouldn't normally get to share it with. Right now, there are people who are open to the message of the gospel, who have been open to the message of the gospel. Right now, there are people that are searching for answers. They're looking for truth. Right now, in the middle of this great darkness, we have the opportunity to shine a bright light. Let's not waste this opportunity. We have this opportunity right now to shine bright. So in this scattering time, Philip
goes to Samaria and he preaches the gospel to people who otherwise would not have heard it, people who were different from him. Just recently I was blessed to, right in the middle of all of the protests and the riots that were taking place in numerous cities in America, one of our black Free Will Baptist pastors, he's planted a Free Will Baptist church in Virginia Beach, Virginia, Marshall Bonet. He shared that Sunday morning, right in the middle of all of that they had two people give their life to Jesus. Two people had come to know Jesus, one black person and one white person. And that's the beauty of the gospel. It transcends racial lines. It transcends political lines because it's not something that we achieve. It's not something that we're born into. It's something that God gives us, that his grace pours out on us. And right now, in the middle of this divided, polarized culture, we have an opportunity to share the gospel, which is the truth and the hope of nations for all people. So the first beautiful opportunity that comes in a scattering is that there's the opportunity for more people to share and to lead. There's opportunity for people who are far from God, who would not have heard otherwise, to hear. And third, there's an opportunity for that scattering to become joy. I want you to hear verse 8. Acts chapter 8 and verse 8 says this: "And there was great joy in that city." Philip goes and he preaches the gospel in a city of Samaria, and there is great joy in that city. Now, it doesn't just say that those who received the word had joy, but there was great joy in that city. Even people who didn't believe what Philip had to say, even people who hadn't experienced the grace of Jesus Christ, they had joy because of the grace that had been poured out on some in their city. Now, Proverbs 11 tells us that when the righteous prosper, the people rejoice. And when God does great things among his people, it's not only a blessing to his people, it's a blessing to all those that are around them. And in the middle of this scattering, in the middle of this great difficulty, God pours out peace and grace and joy upon this city of Samaritans. What I want you to see is that God can take the scattering and he can use that scattering to bring joy in the lives of other people. He can use that scattering to bring joy in us and to bring joy in those around us. And for Philip to go and preach the gospel in Samaria and for people's lives to be changed, it tells us that people were being freed from demons, that people were being healed of diseases. The church was not only helping them physically, but helping them spiritually. And we could talk at length about how we're called to do both. But because of the presence of the church and the gospel in that city, it brought great joy. And what we see happen again and again in God's word is that when God's people go through great difficulty, but he pours out blessing upon them and gives them peace and grace in the middle of that great difficulty, that it brings joy. And in fact, that's really the story of Jesus. Jesus is scattered. He refers to himself as a seed that has to be thrown into the ground, that it has to die a death, but then brings a great harvest. And over my shoulders in the distance, there are farms where crops have been planted. The seed has been sown into the ground. It has been scattered. It has been scattered into the soil, scattered into the fields so that it can bring about a harvest. Jesus was brought here and planted in the soil, but then rose again, bringing a great harvest of joy. And what God wants to do in us, what God wants to do through us, through the scattering that we have experienced, is he wants to bring a great harvest of joy in our lives and in the lives of those around us. It would be a real shame for this scattering to just be a scattering. It would be a real shame to plant a garden and there not be any crops that come up. It'd be a real shame to plant a field, to spread the crops in a field, and there never be a harvest. And we have gone through an incredibly crazy season, and it would be horrible to go through this pain and not achieve any of the gain. It would be awful to go through this scattering and not have any of the harvest. So I hope that through this scattering we'd see that there's a great harvest of joy that can be reaped. That there's opportunities for us to step up and lead, opportunities for us to step up and share. There are opportunities for people who would not have heard the gospel otherwise to hear it, as those who are scattered go and preach, share the message everywhere they go. May this scattering return a harvest of joy and peace, not only in us, but in all those around us, like happened in Acts chapter 8. Father, I pray that you would bless each that watches this video. Lord, that in the scattering in their lives, Lord, that they would be like seeds that are planted and bring about a great harvest. Lord, I pray that you would help them to see that there's a call upon their life. There's a way for them to step up and lead, a way for them to share, so that those who would not have heard the gospel otherwise would be able to hear. And Lord, I pray that there would be a great harvest of joy in us and those around us. Bring revival, God. We know that we desperately need it. We humble ourselves and we seek your face, God. We recognize that any good in us is not us, but it is you in us. We pray these things.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me where